The wind howled through the canyon like a living thing, carrying with it the scent of smoke and sage, and she knew, with a chill crawling down her spine, that nothing in her life had prepared her for this night. Evelyn Harrow had spent years running from a town that whispered behind her back, from men who saw only her beauty and wealth, from a past that gnawed at her like a relentless wolf. Now, trapped in the shadowed cabin on the edge of the desert, she could hear the low, steady breathing of the man who had saved her life hours before, a man whose presence felt as dangerous as it did magnetic. Talon Rainwalker, the Apache whose reputation preceded him in hushed, reverent tones among settlers and outlaws alike, was seated across the fire, his dark eyes reflecting the flames like liquid onyx. His long black hair fell in a wild cascade over his broad shoulders, and the simple leather cord around his neck held small charms that clinked softly as he moved. Every movement was deliberate, restrained, but the taut power in his limbs hinted at a force that could erupt at any moment. Evelyn felt it in her bones before she saw it, that sense of contained danger, the pull of something primal that made her heart hammer against her ribs. The cabin smelled of pine and dry earth, mingling with the lingering scent of the desert outside. Evelyn drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to hide the tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. She had been taught to control her fear, to mask it beneath a veneer of composure, but with Talon sitting there, so close yet impossibly distant, she realized how fragile her restraint truly was. The fire crackled, throwing shadows against the walls, turning the corners of the room into dark, whispering recesses that seemed to watch her as much as she watched him. "Do you always move like a shadow?" she asked finally, her voice barely above the murmur of the flames. Talon's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Only when it's necessary," he replied, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the wooden floorboards. "Tonight is necessary." Evelyn's pulse jumped. The ambiguity in his words sent a shiver down her spine. She wasn't sure if he spoke of survival or of something darker, something that belonged to the realm of instinct and desire where reason held no sway. She didn't know how she had come to trust him, or whether she even trusted him at all, but the fact that she felt alive in his presence was undeniable. Outside, the wind swept across the mesa, tugging at the edges of the cabin, rattling the single window pane. Evelyn turned, catching sight of the vast desert stretching endlessly into the night, a black sea dotted with the faint shimmer of distant stars. The world beyond these four walls was unforgiving, yet here, inside the cabin with Talon, it felt as if time had condensed, leaving only the two of them. Suspended in a moment that refused to yield, she thought of the journey that had brought her here. Stagecoach ambushed by outlaws, a desperate flight across the desert, and finally, Talon's arrival as if he had emerged from the very spirit of the land itself. He had saved her without hesitation, yet the gratitude she felt was tangled with fear, admiration, and a strange, almost forbidden curiosity. He was a man of the wilderness, a force of nature in human form, and every instinct in her screamed to keep her distance while every heartbeat pulled her closer. Talon stood suddenly, the movement swift and fluid. Evelyn's breath caught. He walked to the small window and peered into the night, his silhouette rigid and commanding. "The night is not safe," he murmured, almost to himself. Then, turning, his gaze found hers, dark and intense. "And neither are you. But here, with me, you will be." The words hung in the air, heavy and magnetic, igniting a fire within her she had thought long extinguished. She could feel the energy between them crackle, sharp as the desert lightning storms that occasionally split the sky with violent beauty. Evelyn's hands shook, not from the cold, but from anticipation, from the raw, inexplicable pull of a man who had stepped into her life like a storm she had no hope of outrunning. She swallowed, her voice barely audible. Don't know if I can trust the storm, Talon. He took a step closer, and she could see the strength in his chest rising and falling, the tension coiled in his muscles, the hint of a predator in his stance. Storms are not meant to be trusted, he said softly, his eyes never leaving hers, but they are meant to be felt. Tonight, we feel. And in that moment, Evelyn realized she had crossed an invisible threshold. Whatever awaited them beyond the flickering firelight, beyond the walls of the cabin, it would change everything. There was no turning back. Evelyn could feel the heat of the fire on her face, but it did little to warm the chill creeping up her spine. Talon moved with an effortless grace, picking up a small bundle of kindling and tossing it into the flames. The sudden flare illuminated the lines of his face, the hard jaw and dark, watchful eyes that seemed to read her every thought. She tried to look away, to focus on the dancing flames instead, but her gaze kept drifting back, drawn by the quiet intensity radiating from him. "You don't need to pretend with me," Talon said, his voice low, a rumble that seemed to vibrate in her chest. "The desert tells me everything." Evelyn shivered, uncertain whether it was the wind or his words that had unsettled her. "I'm not pretending," she said finally, her voice tighter than she intended. I just don't know what I'm supposed to do now." He took a step closer, the firelight glinting off the faint scar that ran along his forearm, a mark of battles fought long before she arrived in this wilderness. "What you do," he said slowly, "is survive. And tonight, you learn to trust the storm inside you." The words made no sense, yet somehow they resonated deep within her. Evelyn had spent so long building walls around herself, walls of etiquette, wealth, and self-preservation, that the idea of surrendering, even for a single night, terrified her. And yet, there was something about Talon, something untamed and alive, that made her want to step over the edge. She walked to the small table in the corner, absently touching the rough surface as though seeking a tether to reality. "You saved my life," she said softly, "and now I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something I can't escape." Talon's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, the firelight revealed a trace of vulnerability in the otherwise unyielding warrior. "Edge," he murmured, "is where most people fall, but some learn to fly." Evelyn blinked, struck by the raw truth in his words. It was as if the desert, the fire, and this man had stripped her of every pretense, leaving only the fragile core of herself exposed. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken, charged with an invisible energy that made the hair on her arms rise. She wanted to run, to hide, to retreat into the comfort of safety, but the pull of the unknown was stronger, almost magnetic. Outside, the wind rattled the cabin walls, sending a spray of dust across the floor. Talon moved toward the window and pushed it open, letting the cold desert night rush in. Evelyn felt it sweep over her, biting, yet exhilarating, carrying with it the scent of sage, sand, and distant fire. Talon's hand brushed against hers as he closed the window, and the contact made her stomach tighten in a way she hadn't expected. "You feel it too," he said, reading her reaction as easily as if he had touched her thoughts. "The desert doesn't lie. The night doesn't lie. And neither do we if we let ourselves." Evelyn wanted to speak, to argue, to regain control of her racing mind, but words failed her. Instead, she took a hesitant step closer until the space between them felt almost unbearable, a charged line of energy humming through the room. Talon didn't move away. He simply watched her, letting her choose whether to cross it. I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've never been like this before." "And neither have I," he admitted, his voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "But there are nights that demand surrender, Evelyn. Nights that change everything." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Evelyn's eyes followed the golden embers, and for a moment the world outside seemed to vanish. All that remained was the heat of the fire, the scent of the desert wind, and Talon standing so close that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. She closed her eyes, letting the tension she had carried for so long melt into the intensity of the moment. The wind howled outside, but inside there was only this fragile, powerful connection that refused to be ignored. Evelyn realized with a mixture of fear and exhilaration that the night would not wait for her hesitation. It would sweep her up like the desert storm itself, and she would either rise with it or be consumed. Talon's hand found hers again, stronger this time, and Evelyn didn't pull away. She could feel the strength in his grip, the promise of protection, and something dangerous and irresistible. Tonight, she understood, would not be a night of safety, but a night that would mark the beginning of everything she had been running from and everything she had been longing for. The desert night outside had grown darker, almost impossibly so, and the wind no longer whispered, it roared, rattling the cabin walls and stirring the embers of the fire into tiny fleeting storms of gold. Evelyn Harrow pressed her palms to the rough wooden table, as if grounding herself in reality, though her mind was anything but. Talon Rainwalker had not moved from his place by the window, yet his presence filled the cabin like a living pulse, a force that made every nerve in her body vibrate with anticipation and unease. "You're thinking about what happened today," he said suddenly, his voice a low, smooth cadence that made her start despite the roar of the wind outside. "About the ambush, about the outlaws, about why you came here at all." Evelyn swallowed, her throat dry. She had tried to leave her past behind, to erase the humiliations and betrayals that had shadowed her for years, but Talon seemed to see it all anyway. I thought I could handle it," she admitted. "But when you appeared, I realized I hadn't been living. I'd been surviving." Talon's dark eyes softened, but only slightly. "Surviving is different from living," he said. "And tonight, I intend to make sure you understand that difference." The words made her pulse quicken. There was a magnetic weight to his gaze, as if he could see the hidden corners of her heart and find what she herself had long forgotten. Evelyn felt a tremor run through her, a combination of fear, longing, and a curiosity she could neither name nor resist. He moved closer, the firelight dancing across the taut muscles of his chest and arms. She could feel the heat radiating from him even across the few feet that separated them. Talon's hand hovered near hers, and the air between them felt thick, charged, electric. Evelyn's breath hitched, her pulse thundering in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away, but another deeper instinct urged her to stay. "Do you trust me?" he asked quietly, his voice almost lost to the sound of the storm outside. Evelyn hesitated, the question echoing in her mind. Trust had always been elusive, especially with men who saw her wealth, her beauty, or her past as a weapon. But Talon, he was different. He carried the wilderness in his very being, a raw honesty that both terrified and drew her in. I want to," she whispered finally. Talon's eyes darkened, and he stepped closer, so close that the space between them seemed to disappear entirely. His hand brushed against hers, not demanding, not pressing, but charged with intent. Evelyn felt her heart lurch at the simple contact, and the room seemed to tilt slightly as if the fire, the wind, and the two of them were caught in a private orbit of tension outside. A sudden gust slammed against the cabin walls, rattling the window pane and sending a swirl of desert dust into the room. Talon's hand moved to the window, closing it with deliberate strength, his other hand still lightly touching hers. "The world outside is merciless," he said, voice low and steady. "But here, with me, you are more than survival. You are life itself." Evelyn's lips parted, breath trembling. She had imagined romance, desire, passion, but never with such intensity. Never with a man who carried both danger and protection in every movement. The fire cast shadows across his face, accentuating the lines of his jaw, the dark intensity of his gaze, the power in his stance. He was a storm contained, a force of nature, and she felt herself being pulled into it whether she wanted to or not. "I don't know if I can," she began. But Talon cut her off with a single, deliberate step that closed the remaining distance. "Then let go," he said softly. "Let the night teach you. Let it show you what it means to truly feel alive." Her mind screamed caution, but her body and heart rebelled. The heat of the fire, the scent of sage and wind, the raw presence of the man before her, it was intoxicating, almost overwhelming. Evelyn realized with a mixture of fear and exhilaration that whatever happened tonight would mark a point of no return. Talon's hand curled lightly around hers, strong but gentle, guiding, not forcing. Evelyn let her shoulders fall, a shiver running through her as she gave herself permission to feel, to surrender, to exist in the charged space between danger and desire. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to pause, as if holding its breath in anticipation. Inside the cabin, firelight flickered over two souls on the edge of an unknown precipice, two forces drawn together by fate, danger, and the undeniable pull of something neither fully understood, but both could no longer deny. And in that suspended moment, Evelyn Harrow realized she had stopped surviving. She had started living. The dawn was a muted gray, the kind of light that seeped through the cracks in the cabin walls and painted everything in shades of uncertainty. Evelyn Harrow sat on the edge of the cot, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood as though it held the answers to questions she hadn't yet dared to ask. Outside, the desert wind had calmed, but the night storm still lingered in her chest. A rhythm of adrenaline and unspoken desire that refused to abate. Talon Rainwalker was already awake. Standing near the window, his silhouette framed by the faint morning light. He did not look at her, yet she felt his eyes on her back, weighing, assessing, guarding. Evelyn's heart quickened, not from fear, but from the strange magnetic pull he exerted on her, a force that was part danger, part promise. "You're quiet this morning," Talon said, his voice low, breaking the fragile silence. "Thoughts heavy?" Evelyn hesitated. She had been thinking about the outlaws, the desert, and the narrow margin by which she had escaped death the previous night. She had also been thinking about him, about the way his presence unsettled her, the way he made her feel alive and terrified all at once. "Yes," she admitted finally. "Heavy and complicated." Talon turned, his long hair falling over his shoulders as he moved toward her. "Complicated is a kind of truth," he said softly. "The desert, the storm. Your life, it is not meant to be simple." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, Evelyn saw a flicker of something she hadn't expected: vulnerability. Fleeting and real, beneath the warrior's surface. It made her chest tighten. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance between them, but the memory of their first night together, the intensity, the storm of desire, made her hesitate. She had never experienced anything like it, and the memory both exhilarated and frightened her. Before she could speak, a sharp sound from outside drew their attention. A hoofbeat, distant at first, then growing closer, steady, and deliberate. Talon's eyes narrowed, his body tensing like a bowstring drawn taut. Evelyn felt a flicker of fear, the old instinct to flee rising, but Talon's hand on her shoulder rooted her in place. "They're coming," he said quietly. "Outlaws. Or worse." Her pulse quickened. She had escaped once, but she knew now that survival in this desert depended on more than luck. It required strategy, courage, and the trust she had so reluctantly begun to place in Talon. "What do we do?" she asked, voice tight. Talon's gaze swept across the horizon beyond the cabin, calculating, precise. We do not wait. We move before they reach the canyon. Trust me, Evelyn. She nodded, swallowing her fear. The trust she had begun to extend to him was fragile, but it was real. And in the desert, real trust could mean the difference between life and death. Talon moved first, his movements fluid and purposeful. And she followed, heart hammering, feeling the weight of his presence as both shield and fire. They slipped out the back door of the cabin, the wind carrying them like shadows into the rocky outcrop behind the structure. The desert stretched endlessly before them, unforgiving and raw, but Talon's knowledge of the land was absolute. Every ridge, every boulder, every whisper of the wind guided him, and she had no choice but to follow Dot as they paused behind a jagged rock formation. Talon lowered his voice, almost to a whisper. You must be silent. Let the desert be our ally. Their eyes are keen, but they do not know the land as we do. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, the thrill of danger mingling with the pulse of adrenaline she had first felt in his presence the night before. She had always lived cautiously, measured every step, every word, every thought. Yet here, pressed against the wild desert with Talon, the rules no longer applied. The wild demanded surrender, and she realized she was willing to give it. The distant hoofbeats grew louder, a sinister rhythm against the stillness of the morning. Talon's hand found hers again, firm and grounding. No matter what happens, he murmured, we survive. Together. Evelyn squeezed his hand, a silent promise that she would follow him into whatever danger awaited, into the storm of the desert, and into the storm that had begun to rage between them. For the first time, she understood that survival was not merely about escaping death, it was about choosing to live. Even when every instinct told her to hide Dot, and in that moment, Evelyn Harrow, 30 years of carefully constructed caution behind her, stepped fully into the desert, into danger, and into the magnetic, unrelenting pull of Talon Rainwalker. The canyon walls echoed with the distant thunder of hooves, a rhythmic pulse that gnawed at Evelyn Harrow's nerves. Her fingers were still entwined with Talon Rainwalker's, but her heartbeat raced as if it wanted to escape her chest entirely. She had known danger was never far from the desert, but the sound of pursuit made it tangible, immediate, and terrifying. They're close, Talon murmured, his voice low, almost reverent, carrying no hint of panic. Evelyn noticed how the warrior's muscles coiled like spring steel, every inch of him alert, every movement precise. The calm in his gaze contradicted the pounding in her own chest, yet it was oddly comforting. She had no choice but to trust him. Talon's eyes flicked to hers for a brief instant, and the intensity of his gaze sent a shiver down her spine. When I give the word, you run for the rocks to the north. Keep low. Do not look back. Do you understand? Evelyn nodded, swallowing the lump of fear in her throat. She had spent her life calculating every move, every decision, and now, stripped of city comforts, stripped of pretense, she felt the raw edge of survival pressing against her. I understand, she whispered. A shadow passed along the ridge above them, and Evelyn flinched, her pulse surging. Talon's hand tightened around hers for a moment, grounding her, reminding her that she was not alone. Now, he said, and they sprang into action. The desert rocks were jagged and unforgiving, but Talon moved with a predator's grace, guiding Evelyn through hidden crevices and narrow ledges. Each step was calculated, each movement silent, yet every snap of a stone underfoot sounded deafening in her ears. She had never felt so alive, so exposed, so vulnerable, and so utterly aware of the power of the man beside her. The outlaw's shouts reached them now, harsh and impatient, punctuated by the occasional command. Talon pressed her into a shadowed recess behind a boulder, his dark eyes scanning the canyon above with sharp intensity. They think they know the land, he murmured, almost to himself. But they do not. And tonight, neither will they see you. Evelyn could barely breathe, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had been in danger before, had faced men with guns and teeth and cruel intent, but the combination of fear and the intimate closeness to Talon made her senses explode. The scent of his skin, the steady warmth of his hand over hers, the quiet confidence that radiated from him, it was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. A figure appeared over the ridge, silhouetted against the gray morning light. Talon's hand went to the small knife at his belt, his body coiling like a spring ready to strike. Evelyn's eyes widened as the outlaw descended, unaware of the trap Talon had set, unaware that the desert itself seemed to bend to the Apache's will. With a swift motion that blurred in the early light, Talon leapt from the shadows, knife flashing in his hand. The outlaw barely had time to react before Talon's strength and precision pinned him to the ground. Evelyn gasped, not from the violence, but from the fluid, controlled power that emanated from him. Every movement was deliberate, every strike measured, and she felt the raw, primal force that had drawn her to him in the first place. The remaining outlaws hesitated, startled by the sudden display of skill and power. Talon did not hesitate. With a low, commanding growl, he signaled, and the men scattered, unwilling to confront a force they could neither predict nor control. Evelyn's knees weakened as the tension broke, and Talon caught her before she could stumble, his hand firm and protective. "You're safe," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against the wind. Evelyn looked up into his eyes, seeing both the fierceness of the warrior and the gentleness of the man who had guided her through danger with unwavering precision. She pressed close, feeling the heat of his body, the steady strength that had protected her, the undeniable connection that had grown since the night before. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. Talon's lips curved into a faint smile, and he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "Tonight, survival was only the beginning. There is more to feel, more to understand, and more to become." Evelyn exhaled slowly, the adrenaline still thrumming through her veins. She realized that the desert, the danger, and the man beside her had changed her irrevocably. No longer merely a survivor, she was a participant in the wild, unpredictable storm of life and desire. And Talon Rainwalker was both the force and the shelter she had longed for without knowing it. The canyon seemed still. Once more, the distant hooves gone, the desert calm, but Evelyn knew the storm between them was only beginning. And for the first time in years, she was ready to face it fully, without hesitation, without fear, with the man who had saved her life and had ignited something she could never deny. The sun had climbed higher, painting the desert in harsh, unforgiving light, yet the cabin felt cooler than the wind-scorched plains outside. Evelyn Harrow sat by the fire, her fingers absently tracing the rim of the tin cup she held, but her mind was elsewhere entwined with the memory of Talon Rainwalker's power. The way he had moved through the canyon like a shadow, untouchable and inevitable. Every glance, every touch since their flight from the outlaws had burned into her memory. Refusing to be ignored, Talon leaned against the doorway, arms crossed over his broad, muscular chest. His long black hair fell in wild waves over his shoulders, the tribal charms at his neck catching the firelight, glinting like distant stars. He observed her quietly, and Evelyn could feel the weight of his gaze as though it were tangible, pressing against her very soul. "You've been thinking," he said softly, his voice low and resonant. "The canyon, the outlaws last night? Your thoughts are restless." Evelyn's lips parted, unsure of what to say. He had a way of seeing everything without speaking, of unearthing the truth she hid even from herself. I can't stop thinking," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "About you, about us. About what happened. Talon stepped closer, the floor creaking under his weight, and for a heartbeat, she caught the scent of him smoky, earthy, wild, and it made her breath hitch. He leaned slightly forward, eyes dark with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "What happened was not mere chance," he said. "It is the first step in something neither of us can ignore, something neither of us can resist." Her stomach tightened at his words. The truth of it, the undeniable pull, the fire between them, was frightening and exhilarating. She had spent decades mastering control, shaping her life to avoid vulnerability. Yet here, in the presence of Talon, she felt herself unraveling willingly, surrendering to a force older than herself, primal and unyielding. "Do you regret anything?" she asked, voice trembling. "Being here? Being with me?" Talon's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, one that held both warmth and danger. "Regret?" he echoed. "I have lived long enough to know that some nights are meant to change us. Some nights are meant to awaken us. And tonight, you awaken me as I awaken you." Evelyn's heart thundered in her chest, her skin prickling under the heat of his gaze. She wanted to step closer, to bridge the distance between them, but a shiver of fear ran through her, a reminder that surrender carried risk. Yet the risk itself was part of the thrill, the intoxicating knowledge that her heart and body were no longer entirely her own. Talon moved again, closing the space until she could feel the warmth radiating from him. His hand hovered near hers, a silent question, a challenge, an invitation. Evelyn's breath hitched. She began, but the words failed her. They were unnecessary. The air between them carried a tension so thick, so charged, that neither needed to speak. A sudden gust of wind rattled the cabin, scattering ashes from the fire and sending a swirl of smoke into her eyes. Talon brushed it away with the back of his hand, and in that small, intimate gesture, Evelyn felt the raw tenderness beneath his strength. His eyes softened slightly, though the intensity remained, and she realized she could no longer resist the inevitable. Slowly, trembling yet determined, she extended her hand. Talon captured it, his fingers curling around hers with gentle but unyielding strength. The contact sparked a current through her body, a fusion of fear, desire, and trust that made her knees weak. He leaned closer, his breath brushing her cheek, and Evelyn felt the heat rise to her face. "The desert teaches patience," he murmured, voice deep and compelling. "But it also teaches truth. Tonight, you learn the truth of what lies between us." Evelyn's pulse raced as she nodded, surrendering to the moment, to him, to the storm that had been building since the first night they had met. She realized with a mix of awe and trepidation that the cabin, the desert, the firelight, they were merely vessels for what was happening between them, a force she could neither contain nor deny. Talon lowered his head slightly, his lips hovering near hers, and in that charged instant, Evelyn felt the desert, the wind, the fire, and the raw intensity of the Apache warrior merge into one all-consuming presence. She exhaled softly, allowing herself to be fully present, fully alive, and fully on the precipice of the unknown. And as their eyes locked, and the world outside faded into insignificance, Evelyn Harrow understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The desert sun sank low, burning the horizon with streaks of gold and crimson, casting long shadows over the canyon and the cabin that had become both a refuge and a crucible. Evelyn Harrow's pulse raced as she followed Talon Rainwalker through the narrow pass, the wind whispering around them like an unseen audience. The events of the past nights, the outlaws, the danger, the storm of desire and trust had brought them here, to a moment that demanded courage, clarity, and surrender. Talon moved with that same predatory grace, every step deliberate, muscles rippling under the fading light. Evelyn felt the strength and focus radiating from him, a force she could neither resist nor misunderstand. "The canyon narrows ahead," he murmured, voice low but steady. "This is where we make our stand." Evelyn's stomach knotted. She had followed him willingly through the desert, had trusted him with her life and heart, but now the threat was tangible, immediate. The outlaws, she knew, would not relent, and neither could she. Yet the fear that coursed through her veins was tempered by the strange. Fierce calm she felt beside Talon. Somehow, in his presence, danger became purpose. Chaos became clarity. They reached a jagged ridge where the canyon opened to a wide, flat expanse, the perfect place for an ambush. Talon crouched, scanning the horizon, eyes sharp and calculating. Evelyn mirrored him, heart pounding in rhythm with the distant growing thump of hooves. The outlaws were close now, shouting, their voices hoarse with anger and frustration. "Stay behind me," Talon commanded softly, and she nodded, pressing herself against his broad back. The intimacy of it, the sense of being protected and yet intimately entwined, made her pulse flutter. Evelyn had learned in the past week that survival was never purely physical, it was emotional, visceral, spiritual, and with Talon. All these forces collided. The first figure appeared over the rise, silhouetted by the dying sun. Talon's hand went to the knife at his belt, the other hovering near his bow, though his movements were almost imperceptible. Evelyn's breath caught as he tilted his head slightly, assessing the approach, calculating the odds, the angle, the timing. She felt the surge of adrenaline, the intoxicating mix of fear and fascination. And she realized how deeply she had come to rely on him, not just for protection, but for grounding, for clarity, for the spark that made her feel alive. When the outlaws reached the flat expanse, Talon moved like a shadow, swift and precise, disarming one man before he could even react, forcing another to stumble backward into the rocks. Evelyn watched, awe mingled with a thrill she had never known. As Talon controlled the chaos around them with the effortless strength and focus of a man who belonged to the wild, one outlaw broke away, charging toward them, gun raised. Talon intercepted him in a fluid motion, gripping him with such power that the man could do nothing but freeze, terrified. Evelyn's hand found his, gripping tightly. I don't want this to end," she whispered, voice trembling not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. Talon's eyes softened slightly, a rare vulnerability flickering in the fading light. "It doesn't have to," he said, voice low, magnetic. "But some battles must be fought if we are to live freely. And tonight, we fight together." The remaining outlaws, realizing their advantage was gone, turned and fled, their shouts fading into the canyon. Talon exhaled slowly, releasing the tension that had been coiled in his frame like a drawn bow. He turned to Evelyn, taking her face gently in his hands. Her pulse quickened, and the wind seemed to pause, the canyon holding its breath. "You were brave," he said softly, dark eyes locking with hers. "More than you know." Evelyn felt warmth flood her chest, tears threatening to spill, not from fear, but from the profound connection, trust, and admiration she felt for this man who had saved her, challenged her, and awakened something in her she had never allowed to live. "And you? You were everything," she whispered. "Strong, wild, untouchable. But not to me." Talon's lips curved into a faint, almost tender smile. "Never untouchable," he replied, pulling her close. The fire of the setting sun washed over them, illuminating the contours of his face, the strength of his body, the depth of his presence. In that moment, nothing else existed. The desert, the danger, the past, they were irrelevant. Only the heat, the pull, the undeniable connection between them remained as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, Talon pressed his lips to hers, slow, deliberate, consuming. Evelyn melted into the kiss, the culmination of every fear, every longing, every storm that had raged between them. The world was still, the canyon silent, and yet the fire between them roared louder than any desert wind. And in the quiet aftermath, Evelyn Harrow knew that she was no longer merely surviving. She was alive, fiercely, completely, irrevocably. With Talon Rainwalker beside her, the desert was no longer a place of fear, it was a place of passion, of freedom, and of a love she had never dared to imagine. The night settled around the canyon, cool and calm, yet the heat lingered between them, a testament to the power of survival, trust, and the wild, untamable force that had brought them together. For the first time in her life, Evelyn Harrow was not running. She was home,